It's not what you're doing, but you think you've got it all made. You think you're spiritually rich. You're trusting in yourself. So here's a guy who's a publican, a sinner, and he was rich. And he sought to see Jesus, who he was, but could not for the press, the crowd, because he was of little stature. And he ran before and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, for he was to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him, and said, Zacchaeus, make haste, come down, for today I must abide at thy house. And he made haste, and he came down and received him joyfully. Listen to that. He received Jesus joyfully. But when they, meaning the crowd, when they saw it, they all murmured. You know what murmuring means? They were complaining and, whispering and, gossiping about it. They were upset. They murmured, saying that he has gone to be the guest of a man that is a sinner. Yes, he is. Right, that's true. He had gone to be the guest of a man that was a sinner, a publican. And not only that, he was rich. We just read that. Now, the thing about Zacchaeus, though, is he was looking for Jesus, and when he came in contact with Jesus, he received him joyfully into his house. Zacchaeus stood, and he said unto the Lord, Behold, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore to him fourfold. Wait a minute. I didn't see Jesus telling him to... And besides that, he's getting off easy here. I thought you had to sell everything. Did you notice Jesus didn't tell him to do that? Where did he get that idea? Out of his own heart. His heart changed. You see, when he received Jesus joyfully, his own heart changed, and he just took it on himself. He said, I'm going to give half my good. See, if to get into heaven you've got to be totally destitute, Jesus should have stopped and said, well, if you think that's good enough, you got another thing coming. You got to get rid of everything. He didn't say that, did he? In fact, he said, look at the next verse. Verse 9. Jesus said, this day is salvation come to this house. Why? Because this man received Jesus joyfully into his house, and Jesus could see from what the man was saying that he had experienced a change of heart. And he didn't do anything but just receive Jesus joyfully. So he's an example, just like we're talking about, a man who was poor in spirit. Now my favorite one, and all he did was receive Jesus. My favorite one is found in, and I'm going to conclude with this one, in the 7th chapter of Luke's Gospel. This is my favorite example of this, verse 36. Again, we have the Pharisees, the very righteous people, the self-righteous, the very holy people. And not just that, everyone else regarded them this way too. Verse 36, Luke's Gospel, chapter 7, verse 36. My favorite illustration of this point. One of the Pharisees desired him, that's Jesus, that he would eat with him. And when he went to the Pharisee's house, he sat down to meat. By the way, he goes to the sinner's house, he goes to the Pharisee's house, he'll come to anybody's house. And behold, a woman in the city, which was a sinner. Now this is very polite language, I hope you understand what they're saying. When she knew that Jesus sat at meat in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment, and stood at his feet behind him weeping, and began to wash his feet with tears, and to wipe them with the hairs of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with ointment. Now remember, this woman is a woman regarded as a sinner. And in the house where Jesus is, he's in the house of the holy person. So this woman of the city, who is regarded as a sinner, she comes in and begins to weep, and she's pouring out the contents of this alabaster box on Jesus' head and his feet, and she's weeping and washing his feet with her tears. And it's a little bit, kind of a scene, you might say. Verse 39, Now when the Pharisee which had bidden him saw it, he spoke within himself. That means he had this thought to himself. This man, meaning Jesus, if he were a prophet, he would have known who and what manner of woman this is that toucheth him. That really got his goat. That toucheth him, for she is a sinner. Well, he said if Jesus were a prophet, he would have known what kind of woman it is. I don't see that the Pharisee claims to be a prophet. How did he know? That's just food for thought. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say he's just looking out the window. He's just observing everything that's going. But you see people like this, remember what Jesus said. He spoke this parable to some who trusted in themselves that were righteous and despised others. People who have that self-righteous attitude, they're always on the lookout for everything else that everybody else is doing. So I'm sure that he did know who the sinners in the city were. But he said, here's this woman. If he were a prophet, he would have known who this woman is and what the implication is. He wouldn't be letting her touch him if he knew how bad she was. Listen, Jesus doesn't mind if sinners touch him. He's glad for us all to touch him. You know, the Pharisee had an idea of holiness that a lot of people do have today. That if I come in contact with a person who is unholy, their unholiness is going to pollute me. If I go to a place or with a person that I regard as less clean or unholy or unrighteous, it's going to pollute me. Jesus didn't have that attitude. Jesus had the attitude that there's something in me that if a sinner comes in contact with me, what's in me is going to help them. See, that's how we should think of it. Well, I've got something in me that will help those who come in contact with me. I'm not worried about who touches me or comes in contact. That's how we should think of it, like Jesus. Evidently, he thought that way. So, got the picture now? There's the holy man whose house Jesus is eating at, and the woman of the city that's a sinner, and nobody's defending her and saying she's not. So we got the holy man and the sinner, and Jesus is sitting here in the middle, and Simon, the Pharisee, he's just having these thoughts to himself. Jesus, he's pretty smart. He knew what Simon was thinking, and so he said in verse 40, Jesus answered and said, Simon, I have something to say to you. Now, right there, that should be a clue to watch out. I've got something to say. And so Simon, very cool, says, oh, yes, Master, say on. And so Jesus says, verse 41, there was a certain creditor who had 2 debtors. The one owed 500 pence, the other 50. Now, we don't need to worry what a pence is. Just think that there's a rich person, a creditor. A creditor, see, the one who loans is the creditor, like the bank. The creditor has 2 debtors. 2 individuals owe him money. One owes him 500, and one owes him, what was the other amount? 50. In other words, 500 is a lot, 50 is not very much. In other words, one owes him a lot, one doesn't owe him very much. Now, do you understand what he's saying so far in this story? He's saying God is like the creditor, and the Pharisee is like the person who doesn't think they owe very much. And the woman of the city, the sinner, she's like the person who has a huge debt. She's got a big debt because she's a sinner, and he's got a small debt because he thinks he's pretty righteous and hasn't done much wrong. But they both owe something. One doesn't owe as much as the other one, so relatively speaking, one is better off than the other one. But Jesus said they both have a debt. Verse 42 says, and when they, meaning both of them, when they had nothing to pay. Stop right there. He says one owed him a lot, one owed him a little, but neither could pay. So when you put it that way, then they're both in the same boat. Yeah. Then it erases the difference. In Romans chapter 3, Paul says, for there is no difference, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So it doesn't matter if you missed it by an inch or by a mile. If you missed the mark, you missed the mark. See? Unless you're perfect, then you're not perfect. Unless you're perfect, you've got to have a perfect Savior. See? He says one owed him a little, one owed him a lot, but neither could pay. So what does the master do, the creditor? He frankly forgave them both. He's saying this is God's attitude about it. Frankly means freely. He freely forgave them both. God's got free, meaning, you know what free means? No strings attached. Free forgiveness for everybody. I wish I had time to go off on that tangent and talk about that. Freely forgave them both. But then here's an interesting question. See, they're both freely forgiven. He says, tell me therefore, which of them will love him the most? See, what brought this on was the woman who was a sinner came into the house, and she was putting on this great display, weeping, washing his feet with her hair. And Simon's just sitting there talking to him. Simon answered, and he says, who will love him the most? Simon answered and said, I suppose that he to whom he forgave the most. And he said, you have rightly judged. And he turned to the woman and said to Simon, he's looking at the woman saying to Simon, seest thou this woman? I entered thine house, thou gave me no water for my feet. But she has washed my feet with tears, and wiped them with the hairs of her head. Thou gavest me no kiss, but this woman since the time I came in has not ceased to kiss my feet. My head with oil thou didst not anoint, but this woman hath anointed my feet with ointment. Wherefore I say to thee, that her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. Now he's not saying because she did this, she has earned forgiveness of sins. He's saying she does this because she believes she's forgiven. He's saying she's doing this because she believes she's forgiven of sins, so she has such gratitude. That's why she's displaying this love for me. She believes that I'm giving forgiveness of sins and that she is forgiven. Therefore, because she has such love that demonstrates how much she believes she's forgiven. See, that's why Jesus said, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who know that they're bankrupt. Because if you know that you're totally dependent, when you receive His mercy and His grace, you can't help but have an attitude of total love for the Lord. Okay. Wherefore I say to thee,